Perfect. Thank you so much, Daria. Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly introduce all of our amazing speakers today, um, all with different creative backgrounds and experience in the art and creative world, all in advocating change and supporting exactly what Medical Her Story stands for. And first, I'm going to start with Jess Harvey, who is the co-founder and co-creative director of Woven Inc. She co-founded Woven Inc. in 2017, a creative studio using handcrafted animations and illustrations to tell impactful stories, especially in areas like healthcare, gender-based violence, and mental health. Jess works closely with researchers and organizations to amplify their messages, fostering awareness, empathy, and positive change. She also seeks to reshape ideas of success, centering rest, play, and meaningful work in the creative practice. So, everyone give a virtual round of applause. And Jess, if you could give us a nice wave. Yeah, and then unfortunately, Junior Bishop, they couldn't make it today. But just to give a great introduction, anyways, Junior Bishop is a non-binary disabled model and actor signed by ZB Talent. They work to increase representation in the fashion industry, both in front and behind the camera, aiming to create inclusive spaces, whether through modeling, acting, or public speaking. Junior uses their platform to highlight the experiences of disabled and non-binary individuals, pushing for greater acceptance and equity. We will link their socials in the chat, so please look them up and they do amazing work too. Next, Sophia um, is a conceptual artist exploring the intersection of bodies and ethics. She holds a BA from Smith College and an MA from NYU, best known for her groundbreaking project, Cliteracy, which I can't wait for everyone to see. Her work has been exhibited internationally in locations like Portugal, Spain, Nigeria, and the UK. Her work has garnered critical acclaim from the New York Times, The Guardian, and Teen Vogue, just to name a few. Her TED Talk, A Case for Cliteracy, has over 2 million views, and her interactive collaboration with Huffington Post received 3.5 million views. Sophia has also appeared in BBC and Hulu's Planet Sex with Cara Delevingne and in The Dilemma of Desire. So, yeah, nice to have you here today, Sophia. Give us all a wave and we'll give you all a clap. And last but certainly not least, Alex Lyons is a multidisciplinary artist, academic, and teacher whose work delves in gender, sexuality, and body politics in contemporary performances. Specializing in performance arts, Alex uses it as a tool to spark conversation around taboo bodily topics, with a focus on her performances of the vulva/vagina to challenge patriarchal and heterosis-normative constructs. Her expertise in vulvic arts has been recognized through published research, establishing her as a leader in the field. Alex is also a part of the team at the Vagina Museum, which we are planning to all go to at Medical History once again. And yeah, that is the amazing museum in the first physical museum dedicated to vulvas, vaginas, and gynecological anatomy, which we highly recommend. It is in London and it's very, very cool. So yeah, a warm virtual round of applause to all of you, and I'm going to pass on to Elle to start us off.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cecilia, for the introduction to all of our amazing speakers. And once again, welcome everyone to our panel today on art and advocacy. I personally am so grateful to be here today with such an inspiring group of speakers, just to hear about the work that they've been doing and all of the amazing advocacy that goes along with that. We're going to begin the panel with just a general question for all of our speakers, just so they can share their journey into this sort of work, as well as just give a more in-depth overview of the kind of work that they do. And after that, we will give some more focused questions that dive deeper into each of the speakers' personal projects and experiences. So to kick things off, I'd love to hear from each of you about how you came to work at the intersection of art and advocacy. Could you please share a bit about what brought you to this work, what sparked your journey into using creativity as a tool for storytelling and activism? Jess, if it's okay, I think we'll start with you. Yeah, and feel free to share your screen and just to give a more clear picture of the kind of work that you do.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I don't actually have any slides didn't really occur to me to do slides, so it's just going to be my face. I will share a little bit about some of our work a bit later on. I'll share my screen and show you some of our videos. But hopefully I will be engaging enough and just me for the time being. My name is Jess. I co-founded Woven Inc. Isolde, my business partner and very dear friend. We sort of began, I suppose, our relationship back about 12, 13 years ago as housemates, living together, but recent graduates, and both coincidentally with drama degrees and sort of an interest in theatre. So already very much a kind of draw and kind of passion for storytelling and art and performance. And sort of ended up working together with a different company for quite a long time. But when it came to sort of separating and kind of setting out on our own, we sort of set up Woven Inc. about 7 years ago. But we had been sort of working on a series of 3 films at the time. With the Royal College of Midwives. It was a series that shared experiences of people who had undergone FGM, which is female genital mutilation. I'm sure many of you have come across it. The 3 films that we made were sort of not only aimed at sort of raising awareness to and with healthcare practitioners and within a sort of medical space, but were very much aimed at talking directly with people from FGM practicing communities. But had been a series very much led and directed by real voices, real experiences of people who had undergone FGM. I think it felt like there wasn't really another way that we could do it in as authentic a way as we wanted to do it without really putting first and foremost their voices. So lots of like a series of focus groups were run, one-to-one conversations, and we were sort of working and shaping the narratives from their verbatim voices. We didn't use their actual voices due to kind of issues around safeguarding and anonymity, but it felt like this was a sort of an important way to be approaching and accessing these sorts of spaces, and has now become very much our sort of preferred way of working when creating work, which we've done so over the last sort of 7 years. But this series was, I think, one of the first times that we'd worked in this way. And I think we just felt a really deep sense of responsibility to be stewarding and shaping what they'd shared into these films, where they were sharing experiences of both the like severe physical implications of having undergone FGM, but the also kind of ongoing mental health issues and ongoing physical issues that it causes, aiming to raise awareness, but also bring about change in this space. And I think, well, at that point, and most certainly to date, still, it still feels like one of the most profound animation series that we've ever worked on. And I think was very much a sort of core kind of key foundation for how we've ended up working in this space of gender health equity and advocacy. But I think what also really resonated for us was just the importance of the sharing of lived experiences. And I think for this particular series to have been commissioned by an institution like the Royal College of Midwives, it felt really radical. And we didn't want for, I think what we'd found from other videos and things that we'd seen around FGM at the time was that it was just a bit, it wasn't really delving deep enough. And I think what we wanted to create was something that was quite confronting, and we didn't want anything to feel sanitized or skirted around. So because we work in animation, I think we were able to kind of work in a very handmade, very tactile, very physical way that just enabled us to kind of add additional layers of humanness and realness to the work that we were creating. So I think that was sort of the kind of starting point for us. And we definitely found it really compelling to be working in this medium specifically. And sort of having kind of continued in this way, as I was sort of showing just before, was animation allows for vulnerable voices to be shared without need for seeing and physically like hearing actual people speaking. We often work with voice actors when translating voices into the films that we make, but it just felt like this series was a catalyst for us realizing how important this kind of work was, and really helped shape the direction of how we wanted to take our work with Woven Ink going forward. So we actually ended up continuing to work with RCM, Royal College of Midwives, to go on to make 2 additional films. And at the end, I will share links to those 2 series so that you can watch them if you wish. But over the last 7 years, we found ourselves working within similar institutions, within research teams, with individual researchers within the NHS, to help share and communicate lived experiences and qualitative data. And it just feels like there's been a bit of a shift in recent years to really seeing and understanding the value of qualitative data and lived experience, which I feel, and I'm sure many of you agree, it feels like has been deprioritized in favor of its more superior quantitative data buddy, but really feel and believe that you need both to support one another for real change to actually happen. So yeah, a huge privilege to be working in this space to help amplify people's experiences. I am going to show you the first part of a more recent piece that we made. This was a piece that we worked with researcher Dr. Sophie Rees on, who's now based at Bristol. It was a piece about living with a condition called vulval lichen sclerosis, a condition which is unsurprisingly very under-researched, takes years to diagnose due to lack of understanding and knowledge around it. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen and play. I won't play the whole film, but I will link to the full film if people want to watch it, but I'll probably play about a minute or so. And it does have a content warning, so if you wish to turn your sound off or visual off for the time being, please do so. So bear with me and I will just see if I can share my screen. Okay. Has that worked? Can everyone see that? Great. All right, so I'll press play.
I don't remember the last time I woke up and it didn't hurt. You feel kind of unclean. I felt ashamed of myself. Nobody's heard of it, and I don't discuss this with anyone except my doctor.
I noticed that I was burning, and feels like you're sitting in a bowl of acid. You can be all right today, and tomorrow wake up and be in a state again. So you never feel safe or like that's it, it's done.
It's hard enough to bring it up with the doctor, but when you get this...
So I should have unmuted myself there. So I'm going to leave it there, but feel free to take some time to watch the rest of the film if you wish to at a later stage. I'm gonna finish up there for now and pass over back to Elle. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jess, for shedding more light on your work. A couple things. I really appreciated how you, first of all, explained how you put the onus on the populations that you work with, because I always hear of different like artists and research and stuff saying that we did this like with input from the communities you're working with, but I appreciated how you actually gave more clarity on how that process worked. Also, the visuals in that video that you shared with us are just amazing and so touching. So thank you so much for actually sharing with us. I will definitely be watching the entire film on my own time now. Um, Now I think we're going to move on to Sophia, if you want to answer the question next. Would you like me to repeat it, or are you good to go?
Please repeat it while I'm just pulling up my
Yeah,
screen to
absolutely.
share.
So just a repetition of the question, could you please share what brought you into this work of art and advocacy, and what sparked your journey into using creativity as a tool for storytelling and activism?
Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. Just to confirm, everyone can see the screen. I can't see your guys, but that's fine. I'll just trust.
Yes, we can see
So,
you.
okay, perfect. So I've been working on a project for over 12 years at this point that's about the clitoris as a symbol of power and the lack of its presence, the lack of its representation in the culture of art, in the culture of where we have the obelisk so established in cemeteries and national monuments, and yet the equivalent of the phallus is the clitoridian is nowhere in representation, and trying to deal with this complete absence um, and working on that in so many ways. So I started this project talking about so trying to establish like a set of um, human rights that said we have a right to know this part of our body, those of us who have this part of the body, but that everybody has a basic right to know about bodies like without shame, that bodies should not be excised like cancers, healthy bodies, and moreover that like this part of access to our pleasure is a type of knowledge, that in the hiding of that knowledge is a violation of our human rights. But also like that pleasure is a way that we know ourselves, and we know that we're safe, and we know that we're respected. People that care about our pleasure or don't dismiss our pleasure are more inclined to be people that we should trust versus people that have no interest in our pleasure or dismiss it or are fine with our pain. So I worked in many ways, some of them serious, some of them playful. This is the world's first clit rodeo that I did with a male collaborator, Ken Thomas, and the clit was like the star of the show. We had the natural laws of the clitoris behind this artwork, but it was like an opportunity to like do this dance and center the clit. Everybody wanted to be near it. Everyone wanted to have a chance to touch it. And I thought it was like a very, not only was it a lot of fun, regardless of anyone's political identity or their whether they claim feminism as their movement or not. It brought a lot of us together, and I think people said the word clitoris more that weekend than many of them had said it in their entire life, which I consider a huge win. So I've been trying to bring these ideas into public space, which I will say is very difficult because anytime you try to kind of normalize um, female genitals, and put them in public space and say that they're neutral, that, many people have a really hard time with that. So I would not say it's been easy, but I've been working in many different ways with, you know, sculpture and with creating like installations that deal with like the sacred and how the clitoris and the vulva and the vagina have been so demonized within many of our religious faiths. And this idea of like that the best thing we can be is virtuous in terms of what's happening with our genitals, and if something happens to them that's out of our control, that we're somehow tainted and harmed forever. And really trying with this work, trying to say that our bodies are always connected to our spirit and are always divine and can never be made to be somehow outside of what is valuable and what is precious. And um, when I showed this work for the first time, some of the audience that came encountered it happened to be doctors, and there was one gynecologist who got really upset because she didn't know the true anatomy of the clitoris until she encountered this installation. And that idea is just a crazy and shocking reality, and yet this is kind of the crazy state that we're in, because it is so controversial to even place these ideas in public discourse. So just sharing a little bit of my work. Some of it is with street art, some of it is in galleries, some of it is done anonymously, some of it is done collaboratively. This is protest against losing our reproductive rights, and particularly a shout out to like all of the heterosexual identified men who absolutely want to have sex more than the few times it would take to become fathers, but like aren't active in fighting for reproductive rights. It says if you want to fuck us, stand the fuck up for us, and also don't have sex without using protection from fuck boys. And the works are using the iconography of the clitoris and decorated with the evil eye as a protection against the phallus. This is one of my most recent works, and it again is trying to establish this form and make it recognizable, and also try to this is more neon and street art, and it's like, what is this advertising? Oh, it's advertising clits living their best lives. Like, what would that be? I would love to just invite um, everyone of every background to sort of contemplate that and think about clit joy. This work is currently at the Brooklyn Museum, so anyone who's in New York, I would love if you could go by and see the work. It will be there until January 25th. And here are some examples of, I've been trying to make monuments to the clitoridian for many years, and I'm working with the materials I have. So in this case, I was like, I had a solo show in this gorgeous building that had this incredible brutalist auditorium, and I wanted to fill up that space, but I didn't have the resources to do so. So I came up with the idea of like using inflatables and like erecting my own like pop-up monuments to the clitoris in a form that I could. Um, Here's another example of the 100 Laws of Cliteracy. And this is the installation of the solo exhibition. And this is just before we erected the monuments to the clitoridian. I was able to get a group of sculpture students to do this like slip and slide idea that I had. The school did not approve it. But luckily, students are amazing and art teachers are amazing. And they were like, oh, it's kind of a rainy day. Like, let's just like grab this tarp and we'll get some soapy water and we'll just like go for it. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I think my time might be up. But I'll just show we erected another pop-up monument to the clitoris at the Dyke March 2023. And it was pretty glorious and pretty wonderful. And I think, for those of us in this space doing this work, it's not remotely um easy to get institutional backers to work with us, but it's exciting to find new ways to invite audiences to like participate and elevate um, a part of the body that 50% of the world has, and that moreover is just like it's just an icon, I think, of pleasure for everybody beyond if you literally have that organ or not. It's a really potent and exciting symbol to work with. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Sophia. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing so many pictures of the different exhibits you've done. I was not expecting at all for you to show us a picture of a slip and slide and a clit, and I am so glad that that is now burned into my brain and that I will never unsee it because I think that is amazing, as well as so many of the other art pieces that you have done. That's just incredible. Wow. Um, Next, I'll move on to Alex. Alex, would you like me to repeat the question as well, just to refresh your memory?
Yeah, as I just share my screen.
Perfect. Yeah. So, could you please just share a bit about what brought you into the work of doing advocacy with your art and what sparked your journey into using creativity as a tool for storytelling and activism?
Okay, thank you. I hope you can see that and hear me okay. My computer is ridiculously slow and I need to do something about it, but I just haven't. So sorry if the slides take a while to change. I will say I'm neurodivergent. I have dyslexia and ADHD, which sometimes makes for a little concoction of communication issues. So if I ever say something that's unclear, please feel free to like log it and ask me at the end. and just bear with me. I just say it just to give myself permission to unmask. And I will be using my notes just to help me as well. So I'm going to start with the actual starting point, which was when I was 13. This is kind of where it all began. It does make a very brief reference to self-bodily harm. So if you want to just turn your sound off for 30 seconds, please do so. Growing up, I was told to call my downstairs a mini. Out of curiosity, if anyone else has a different term like that they were told to call their vulva, please put it in the chat because there's so many different ones. So I'd love to read them. I didn't know specifically what that referred to, but I knew that it indicated my vulva. From an early age, the language I was taught to use to describe my body made it clear that my genitals were not to be discussed. With that in mind, I grew up with no opportunity to openly discuss such an important part of my body, a part that shaped a huge part of my identity. When I was 13, I remember looking at my vulva and being really deeply ashamed of my asymmetrical and protruding labia. With no education about what my vulva should really look like, I assumed that my longer labia was abnormal. And I know that my experience is not isolated. I know actually this is for a lot of vulva owners. And I wondered if I needed them at all, whether I needed my longer labia and whether I could cut off my longer elongated labia. So I once sat on a bed at the age of 13 with my inner labium between a pair of scissors, debating the best method to remove it. Now, I don't present this story as a way to shame or embarrass my younger self, nor to shame anyone who had similar experiences, but rather I offer this as a dialogue to talk about my experiences of my starting point and why I started using performance as a tool for access to talk about these topics. So in 2015, I think it was, I got very invested in performance art. I was like, wow, what is this new medium that I can express myself? And I created a show called Yoo-Hoo, I'm Horny, which looked at the objectification of women's bodies. And then I done my master's at Queen Mary in London in 2017, and I created a show called Lady Garden, not really based around gender, but I was very openly sexual at the time. And what does that mean to be working with the tensions of being a self-proclaimed slut and taking like a very toxic term and trying to reclaim it? So Lady Garden was a critique of someone telling me that I'm not ladylike. So in the performance, I created a series of tableaus with my body. I projected my mouth talking on my vulva about a very open sexual experience that I had. I got consent before doing it, just so everyone knows. And also I put a bouquet of flowers into my vagina, spread it like a vase, and played the ukulele as I sung a song. So I really like working with nudity and using my vulva as a site for exploration and what does that mean, and trying to in a way play with this idea that people view it as a sexual object, and try and dismantle it while playing with the tensions of patriarchal concepts that are around it. So my interest in using my vulva and vagina as a site of resignification in performance was crucial to my practice. And I then led into these themes. So I'd done my PhD around vulvas in contemporary performance. And in 2017, I started working at the Vagina Museum. And I realized that my experiences were not alone, and that people really needed these spaces to discuss their bodies. And they were so important. They were so important to talk about. And this influenced a huge part of my practice. I became really invested in facilitating spaces where voices could be heard, and experiences could be shared through the access of arts and performance. And I then became really invested in exploring how different identities could be explored through autoethnography and ethnography of all genders, of all identities. And I think that's where the importance of the work really situates itself. So my work is participatory in nature. and uses autoethnography, which grounds my work in personal experiences. More importantly, there felt like there was an urgency for people to talk about their bodies, but also offer this space for people. And I think in doing so, it like humanizes it, right? It brings it into like normalizing it, but everyday dialogue. And that's where I think the work can be quite transformative. I have a utopian belief that actually performance is utopian or is transformative and can create change. I will always tell my students that it changes the world. That is obviously to be debated, but I think it can. So the work is an exploration of lived experiences. And it can create a more empathetic space where individuals can reflect upon their own bodies and identities. So I hope I kind of that's all I have for my beginning bit. But here's me showing my students a plaster cast of my father and normalizing it. Thanks.
No, thank you, Alex, so much for sharing. As someone who is a vulva owner, it's really actually so meaningful to see someone make it into artwork and make it into something that is so beautiful, when we are conditioned from a very young age to be ashamed from it. So I love looking at some of the artwork that you shared. The aesthetics that you employ are just stunning. And thank you so much for also being vulnerable with your story, because I think that really is meaningful because a lot of us can relate. Um, Now that we've heard just a bit more about all of your general and like a broader overview of the specific artwork that you do, I'd love to dive into just some brief, more personal questions. So we'll go back to Jess. Jess, as someone who champions rest and play as well as collaboration in the creative process, how do you think these values contribute to sustainable advocacy, particularly in the fields as emotionally taxing as social justice, and particularly the work that you do? And how do you think that these ideas reflect or influence your work?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, just wow, both great to sort of see more about your work, Sophia and Alex, so thank you. I think, I mean, as you shared, sort of the spaces that we work in, and sort of, well, wider environments around health, can often be quite emotionally weighty. Hearing people's experiences of living with challenging conditions or struggling with healthcare pathways, not getting the treatment or support that they sort of need, and experiences that we probably likely, like as me and as older, don't have firsthand experience of. We, as I was sort of sharing earlier, just really hold that responsibility very preciously. I think in our roles as curators and communicators of these narratives, to ensure that the work that we're making is done so respectfully and sensitively, we ultimately really need to just be taking care of ourselves. And we want to make sure that we're doing their words justice and to be representing them as authentically as we can. So sort of one of the, yeah, so we wanted to make sure that all of the work that we do is done so in a space and kind of mindset where we're not overworked, we're not sort of, well, doing our best to avoid burnout and resting when we're ill, and ultimately not working too much. So I think sort of we so often, well, I think when we really are passionate about the things that we're doing, like there's always more to do and there's always stuff to keep just working on. So I think to ensure that we don't completely, I don't know, fall over and end, yeah, we need to be resting. So resting for me and for Woven Inc. as a sort of whole is kind of one of our core values, I suppose, because running on fumes is just no good. So we actually was one of the first conversations that we ever had when we started Woven Inc. We had come out of both being freelancers, which I think is quite a challenging environment anyway. And we just wanted to make sure that we were carving out space and time for what was important, well, for us. So things like having a decent lunch break and making sure that we were taking walks in the middle of the day to just get physical space. I think at the very beginning we had something called Swim Mondays, where we were like trying to go swimming every Monday. We don't either of us go swimming on Mondays anymore, but it was something that we put in to just try and build like positive habits for ourselves. But one of the things that I think has really helped bring a lot of balance to our work is the decision that we took to make our working week a 4-day working week. We sort of began that right at the start of Woven Ink, and was definitely definitely one of the best decisions we ever made. It was sort of 7 years ago, a term that wasn't really heard of. We weren't even really calling it a 4-day week. We were just saying that we were offline on Fridays. And but sort of as we've seen in more recent times, sort of it's now becoming a much more kind of commonplace in our lexicon, and we're seeing lots of successful trials and I don't know, hopefully that it will be something that will be much more commonplace in not too long. So ensuring rest and play and good habits on our work week, I think just really helps and allows us to create the space and time for the ideas of what we're working on to percolate for the time that they need to percolate before they're finished and kind of ready to be completed and released out into the world. So when we're working with our clients, we're very upfront and sort of share that we don't work to tight deadlines. Our projects just take time, which in sort of research bases and academia isn't always a problem, as we know that that can be quite a sort of gentle paced environment anyway. So that's always helpful. But then I think specifically the medium that we're working in sort of making handmade stop motion animations just really isn't a medium that can be rushed. We can't make it any faster than we can make it. It just takes time. So I think that in itself really helps us just kind of get into the work, and is a medium that we both really enjoy working on. And I often have to remind ourselves that at the time, because sometimes it's that sort of end stage of the project and you just want to get it done, but this is the bit that we're sort of building our whole concept around, so it's a point that we need to just pause and slow down and enjoy it. So yeah, I think sort of more broadly slowing down, allowing space for rest and enjoyment and play really would go a long way to helping to contribute to a more sustainable space for advocacy. So I'll leave it there if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think, at least I know me personally, I have such a hard time actually like scheduling rest or fun things like swim Mondays into my calendar. So that's really good advice, especially when you're working on a project you're so passionate about. Sometimes it can be hard to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and like the longevity of the project. So thank you for sharing some more specific insights with that. Our next question is for Sophia. Sophia, your projects are a great example of art sparking conversations about bodies and ethics that are often stigmatized. But how do you balance, how do you navigate the balance between challenging societal norms while also making the conversation accessible to a wider audience? I know you mentioned that you actually had a gynecologist who did not know the anatomy of a clitoris, which is insane to me to hear. So I'd love to hear your insights on this.
Yes, I'm gonna share my screen again. I I think there's something that is a total honor about working in art because I get to spend my time thinking about representation, um, and thinking about like what communicates what to who and why and for what reason and for whose benefit and what's missing. And so I guess for me, just I have a sort of unapologetically populist kind of preference in terms of like who the audiences are that I care about. Like I really want anyone walking down the street to be able to like, you know, engage with my work, and to me, that is like that is the most valuable thing. And if they have an art background and they have, you know, additional feelings, great, but that's not the audience that matters to me. And so I guess for me, like when I'm making work, I'm just thinking about this idea of like, how can I speak as broadly as possible in the most clear and useful way? And I think, I'm not really working from a neutral perspective. I'm working from my own subjectivity, which is that of like a white middle class lesbian American 45-year-old. And right now, like I'm thinking a lot about the experience of birth, my own experience giving birth, my own experience with like a traumatic cesarean section, and using like the insight that I have pulled from like all of these years, working on my project to establish the clitoridian and thinking about pleasure to suddenly thinking about the way that pain can be minimized, the way that gender shows up in medical care. Um, and certain types of behaviors that would never really be normalized due to the intersection of gender, and then you bring in race and class, and things continue to get worse and worse. So right now, what I'm working on is about my birth trauma, and I'm just showing this because the language of medicine is about every step of the way, the mother is blamed. The words are literally like failed and failure and incompetent cervix and failure to progress and blah blah blah. And very quickly you find yourself you know strapped into a position where you lose access to your mobility, you lose access to your voice, being able to look directly with eye contact at doctors and tell them what you want. The norms for patients in birth particularly are pretty shocking and really need to be questioned. And these are images of some of the things that were done to my body in my birth. I found them out through my medical file, not through anything that the doctors acknowledged. Um, and the way that they were done, um, even in if I give the most kind of sympathetic uh, reading on like the why and the how with my medical team, there are a number of mistakes that were made in my file that were acknowledged that contributed to like me having a very, very difficult recovery. Um, and, currently having PTSD about it. Um, and I think, bringing it back to the original question, it's like, I guess I feel like I have this sort of unique position of the work that I'm doing, the privilege that I have as like a person living now, with the rights that I have in America, and with my education, um, that I can talk about these things and I'm not ashamed. And so what I'm working on right now is a series of new sculptures that have to do with my birth and trying to attend and be present with myself in a time that I felt uh, just the most alone I've ever felt and the most violated. And I was the most violated. And really trying to talk about the architecture of birth and the design of lithotomy and how these infrastructures create a place for harm to happen, even in the best, with a team with the best of intentions, so that there is no really place for like total dignity and humanity and self-determination on the part of the birthing person. This summer, I went to Italy and I had the incredible privilege of working with the Digital Stone Project and carving my first sculpture in marble. And I started working on this piece, and it's called Prescription for Unbearable Knowledge, Delivering Myself. And it's again exploring this wound and this evisceration and all of the many hands that were like inside my body and me trying to protect and care for myself. And yeah, reconciling this experience. So here's an example of the work. I'm still developing it, but that's as far as I got this summer, and the piece is coming back from Italy. It should be back in the country in the next month or so. And right now, I'm actually getting a second master's at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And I'm thinking about forced motherhood, and I'm thinking about the way that um, the pregnant belly is revered and fetishized and elevated, and then the second there isn't a baby in there, it's considered grotesque and should be hidden and is embarrassing. And the fact that it did what it did and now is has loose skin, or has scars, or has fat in different places, and the organs have moved to different places, that's considered shameful and should be hidden. And this the state of reproductive justice in this country. And this is another piece that I'm working on right now, and it's about, on the left, the figure is like successfully surrendered, and that word surrender is used so commonly in um, even in like feminist contexts, and considered like encouraging advice for mothers who are going into labor, is like to surrender. But this is like the lithotomy position, and the figure on the right is like has too much freedom because they still have access to their legs, so they could like run away and escape, which is not really how our Western medical system really likes to deal with birth. Like, so many of the interventions require the patient being immobilized, losing access to their abdominal strength, losing access to gravity, losing access to being able to like physically move as they feel the need to. Um, and these are, this is like a study for sculpture. It's not at all done, but I just finished this stage of the work about 2 days ago, and I have them on a little swing set, playfully, joyfully, in this state of like crazy, like what is even happening in this country with reproductive rights. And this is my work that's at the Brooklyn Museum currently, and will be there till January 25th. So just wanted to invite anyone who happens to be in New York in that time to please come visit the show, the Brooklyn Artist Exhibition. It's an amazing show. And my work is there, and I'd love if you have a chance to see it. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Sophia, for being, first of all, so vulnerable and sharing that experience with us. I think that bringing the emotion, and I loved how you put the two sculptures that you're working on right now on a swing set. I think that is quite beautiful. And thank you. I can definitely, your emotion for sure comes through in your work so much. So thank you for sharing a bit more of your process with regards to that. Um, we just have one more question left for Alex. Sophia, I know you said you had to make a flight, so if you need to log off at any point, that's okay. Just wanted to thank you again for coming today, and please drop your socials in the chat as well, or your website, so everyone can look you up and maybe go to your exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum if they're able to. But thank you again so much for attending.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mm, yeah, so our final question is just for Alex. Alex, your work and research focuses on using performance as a tool for sparking discussions around taboo bodily topics. How do you handle the pushback or resistance that can come when your work challenges existing power structures?
Thank you, Fuzzy, Jess. And oh my God, brain. What was I even gonna say? Sorry, I'm like that neurodivergent Earth where you go to say something and then you just totally forget everything. Yes, anyway, brain fog. Thank you so much, Jess and Sophia, and then I will try and remember what I was about to say. This is a really great question. So firstly, in terms of like power dynamics, my research is really deep rooted in like queer and feminist theory, but also like post-colonial theory. So I don't know, just in case some people aren't aware, the kind of knowledge that we have around gynecology is through racism and medical racism. So the father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims, the reason we have that knowledge is because he practiced on enslaved Black women. So that being said, there's for anyone who doesn't know, there has been a movement in the last couple of years, and lots of post-colonial academics really working on this. So rather than acknowledging Sims as like the father of gynecology, we actually now acknowledge the mothers of gynecology. So saying their name, which is Annika, Betsy, and Lucy. And there were other women. Unfortunately, there aren't records, but we know around about 18 other women were there. I think even through having these influences, so queer, feminist, and post-colonial theories already, it kind of navigates the structure of resistance within the work. And these frameworks are essential for unpacking how power operates through the politics of the body, particularly vulvas, and legitimizing the discussions that my work tries to kind of like seek to dismantle. If it will change. Hey, there we go. So I don't know if I necessarily believe that one can always handle the pushback that comes from this type of work, especially when I work when I'm doing work around nudity and identity. It's personal. It is personal. Politics is personal. But I am actually quite interested in exposing that resistance and allowing this tension and this resistance and the fact that there's like power dynamics within it to drive my work forward and to challenge that. So in many ways, the power dynamics and the resistance to these topics aren't just obstacles. They're not obstacles, but they're an integral part of my creative process. So they fuel my work. It's like the reason that this work exists is to challenge it. So this is my fabulous colleague and performance artist, Orla, and we done a show called Obscene to Be Seen, which was part of my PhD. Orla has Roma heritage, and she was raised as a witch by her mother. And we were looking at the ways that we can queer myths. So there is, it is a myth, but it was wrote in like a 15th century manuscript when the witch craze was in Europe, well, everywhere across the globe. But I think it's by Albertus Magnus. And he said that if a woman was to cut off her hair, there is research that suggests pubic hair, but in this it's just reference hair, but there's lots of different theories around pubic hair as well in there. Cut off their hair and bury it in the earth, a serpent would appear. So yeah, like things like this. So menstruating woman, cut off her hair, bury it in the earth, serpent appears. So we looked at how we could reinterpret this. So Plats and witchcraft and Roma heritage all kind of intertwined. So we made merkins, and then we recreated this myth of the snake, and tried to change that power dynamic, reinterpret that myth, and make it interesting. Again, with power dynamics and nudity and just talking about vulvas or anything that's taboo in general, it does provoke people. It is provocative, right? And one thing I will always say to my collaborators, my audiences, even participants in that is that, that's a really valid feeling, that feeling of uncomfortability, and one that I would say that you should explore. Like, where does that feeling come from, right? What is that? I know there was recently a performance in Germany where a group of artists pissed on stage, specifically people with vulvas, and it's made like international news. But what is that kind of feeling about why is that provocative? More so because we see people with penises piss quite a lot anywhere. So what does that mean for actually people with vulvas to piss on stage and like go against institutions, and also like these ideas of morality that we have, and where does that stem from, or obscenity, and something that Sophia said was in terms of like, say, when the baby is no longer within the belly, then the body is perceived as monstrous, obscene, polluted, and I'm interested in that as well, this kind of work, and that comes from a power dynamic. So my aim in these conversations is not to ever alienate anyone. I don't think that's productive in any type of way, but actually to spark and generate conversation about why that might be. A really good example is my colleague and friend Florence, who's the director of, is the founder, has moved aside from being director, but is the founder of the Vagina Museum. And she recently went to Canada for a conference. And at Border Control, they asked her reason for visiting. So she said conference, and they said, oh, what's your job? And she went, oh, I'm the founder of the Vagina Museum. And the person at the border control was like very provoked, very angry by this, and kind of was like, that's disgusting. And Florence kind of just took a breath, yep, and was like, okay, and was like, okay, I like and empathized, but actually said, well, did you know that 35% of women in the UK aged 25 to 35 are too embarrassed to go have their cervical smear test or cervical screenings. And his posture changed. He kind of like simmered a little bit down and then was like, oh my goodness, no, I didn't know that my auntie passed away from cervical cancer. And it just goes to show that actually these are the reasons that this work needs to exist. These are the reasons that these conversations need to exist. And there are ways, not always, but there are ways that we can kind of shift these power dynamics through conversations. And that's integrated in my methodology. I'm really interested in putting that in my methodology. So I often do workshops, we generate work. I like talking to audiences. I find this kind of dialogue very important. And the nature of my research gives multiple entry points for people to facilitate and create their own work. So this is another piece within my PhD performance called Obscene Dipsy. And Dan was looking at how mythology, there's especially Greek mythology, there's a lot of movement for transness. So Dan explored myths and spoke about his identity whilst projecting a video of him when he was little. And he laid his voice with his voice pre-testosterone and then laid it onto a poem that he wrote post-testosterone. It was a very beautiful piece. But again, like these spaces are really needed because in order to challenge these kind of existing structures of power, it's to allow audiences to see an identity outside of one's own, to hear lived experiences outside of one's own, to hear how things have impacted people. And I think that goes to show in terms of Florence's story as well, which I mentioned earlier at the airport. So this pushback kind of reveals maybe further discussion that's needed. And that's a tool and a driving force for me. I see it as an invitation to adapt the work and propose that taboo itself can be a site for creative power, really. And it's not a position of controversy. It's like this beautiful, lovely thing that we should all talk about, and it's just as normal as your ear. So I use it as a site of inquiry and creativity and resistance. And I will leave it there. And then this is our very final scene. And we spoke about a time where we felt most at home in our body. And some people still haven't quite got there, and that's okay. But we then, for vulva validity, we made sure that we had like this lovely big painting of a vulva. And a lot of our work was around like skin and it being gutsy to put this, and there's a high stake on work for it. So this is our final scene that we put down. And then here's my stuff. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Alex. I really loved what you said about uncomfortability being a chance to actually have those conversations and question why we're uncomfortable and how that really has a space to sort of like create those avenues for change. Also, your visuals are, as I'm seeing in the chat here, absolutely stunning. So I feel so grateful that you are sharing those with us today. I think we just maybe have one question in the chat. If either of you two can just give like a quick response to this. But we have for Jess and Alex, for those who in the audience who may not identify as artists, what advice would you give them to harness their creativity to advocate for change, even if they're not sure where to start? So Jess, maybe we'll start with you quickly.
Sure. A really lovely question. I'm not sure there is anywhere to start other than starting. It's often the most difficult thing is often just beginning something or anything. So kind of creating and allowing, or just booking in some time for yourself to sit down and just sit in front of whatever medium you feel most drawn to, and doing anything, I think would be the place to start. that would, yeah, I know, but I know how hard it is to start. I often really struggle with that myself. So it's easy to sit down and do emails every day, but actually to get up and sit and stand in front of my rig and actually make an animation, I just procrastinate as much as I possibly can before I actually begin. So yeah, just starting is hard. So allowing yourself some space and time and honoring that, I think is the best place to start.
Thank you. It's really reaffirming to hear that even experts like yourself still struggle with starting. So thank you so much for humanizing that and sharing that with us. Alex, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think just existing and having an opinion and sharing that opinion is enough, and allowing yourself to take up space with that. But if you do want to get creative, sometimes, so my when I was doing my master's, my tutor had done this really great exercise with me where it was like, just imagine a scenario, anything. And mine was something wild, like I don't know, I covered myself in like maple syrup and lots of different things, and I was a slug. And he was like, okay, go do it. And I was like, what? And it's like, oh no, like you just have to do it, even if it's rubbish, just create a thing. Or if you have like a general thought or feeling in your head, write it at the top of a page, and put a 3-minute timer on and just like word like splurt on the page. It doesn't have to make sense. It can literally be what you ate for breakfast, and you might go on the weirdest tangent, and that's fine. But there'll be something in there where you can pull these keywords out and start like generating material from. So don't have to be an artist, but if you do want to put thoughts onto a page, then go for it. And there are ways that you can do it where you don't have to like class yourself necessarily as an artist. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. I feel like that advice about you'll be able to find some nugget that you can be inspired with and move forward through, even in the midst of a very unintelligible word vomit. I like that idea a lot. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm just being pretty cognizant of the time because I know we do have a workshop. But I'd like to give a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their stories, insights, and creative processes with all of us. I know I'm personally leaving the conversation feeling very inspired and energized, and I can tell from all these lovely reactions in the Zoom chat that our audience is feeling the same as well. Um, just my own personal takeaway, I think, from this discussion is the immense value of exploring and validating diverse methods of knowledge production, especially in terms of like healthcare and like health experiences and gender health equity. Because as a lot of you guys have alluded to, we live in a world where like that quantitative traditional research kind of dominate. So I think it's really crucial that we recognize the power of art, movies, and storytelling as like lived experiences, and lived experiences like vital sources of knowledge, because ultimately the fact that organizations like ours and the work that you guys are creating means that there's a gap, a knowledge gap here, and it's great to learn from and experience so many wonderful people talking about the amazing work that they're doing to combat this. So Jess and Alex, if you haven't already, if you want, you can share links to your projects or websites in the chat here, because I know that maybe not everyone got to ask all their questions today. So people can see more about your work or potentially reach out to you. But thank you again so much for joining us today. And we'd love to keep the conversation and momentum going, even beyond just the panel that we had